So last week saw the release of the latest chapter in the Tales of Arcadia anthology series, Wizards. Coming into the season, I was really apprehensive about what was billed as the final chapter of the series. I wasn't confident that they'd be able to balance out so many characters' different storylines whilst also trying to hone in on a select handful that we really hadn't seen before. And I also had some doubts about time travel plotlines because they often end up damaging what was up until that point a pretty good show. So with all that in mind, I think they pulled it off really well. I really enjoyed it. I was so hyped straight after I binged it, and I couldn't stop reflecting on how much I liked it. But I do think there were some hiccups along the way. We'll start off with the characters. For the most part, I think that the show handled the new characters really well. Dukesy was, in my opinion, the standout character. I wasn't sold on him coming into the show based on his few limited appearances, but I really quickly warmed up to him once we were able to learn more about him. I really enjoyed his rapport with his familiar Archie, who was another standout character, and overall he probably had the best arc of the characters this season. It was interesting to watch his character grow from the young and goofy apprentice at Camelot to a more serious and determined master wizard by the end of the season. Plus, he was actually able to make Merlin seem likeable at some points, and even made me care when he died, so that's pretty impressive to me. Of the other characters with fairly solid arcs, I thought Claire and Steve were handled quite nicely. We saw Claire further develop her skills with shadow magic and actually start to form a bond with Morgana despite their past animosity, and Steve was able to carve out a role for himself on the team as a knight type character. I was a little disappointed that he didn't pull out Excalibur at the end, so I hope that's coming in the future, but for all I know, that's for Jim or even for an out of left field Eli. I'm sort of okay with the Morgana Redemption arc. On one hand, it doesn't really gel all that well with her character in Troll Hunters and seems like a bit of a massive jump when you initially meet her good version. But on the other hand, I like the subversion of the Arthurian myth for her to be the hero in the end instead of Arthur. Speaking of Arthur and the Knights, they were well done for the most part. Lancelot and Galahad were good comic relief characters to bounce off of Steve and give him more of a storyline, and whilst he was alive, Arthur was a really interesting character. I liked that he wasn't just some pure and nice king. He had his own demons and was one of the causes of Morgana's fall from grace. But I liked that by the Battle of Killerhead, he'd recognised his mistakes and worked to rectify them, losing his life in the process. That's where I would have ended his arc. But then they do the Scooby-Doo twist where he's the Green Knight all along and now he's evil and he wants to kill all the heroes he worked to save in his final moments. I understand that he's mind controlled initially, but when Morgana and Claire visit Arthur and Jim's souls in the Shadow Realm, we clearly see that Jim is his usual good self, but Arthur just reverts back to the fear and ignorance we saw in Camelot. He just does a full 360 throughout the series and I don't think it really works at all. He doesn't need to come back once he's accepted his mistakes. He should have just stayed dead. And that brings me to Jim, the main character of Troll Hunters, the iconic hero. I felt like his whole arc in Wizards was, for the most part, boring. After not seeing him in ages, he comes back and he doesn't really do anything besides mentoring Dea, and then he turns into a big angry troll, gets mind controlled, and then turns back into a human. For me, it felt like they decided they wanted him to be human, so they had to come up with some filler for him to do so they can put that in the last few moments of the final episode. And then that brings us to the story. One of the biggest positives was I felt like the writers have worked hard to perfect the formula, so to speak. I felt that the episodes were really concise and packed to the brim with action, plot, and character development. And for the most part, they trimmed the fat and made the story flow really efficiently. But that being said, I still think there were some problems. First and foremost of these problems was time travel. I just don't think the story needed it. Yes, it allowed us to see one of the more important moments in Tales of Arcadia lore, but it made the story unnecessarily convoluted. I mean, just take a look at the villain progression. First we have the Green Knight, which then reveals the Arcane Order, which turns into King Arthur and Morgana as dual villains on opposite sides, which turns into Morgana, Gunmar and Bulla, which turns into the Arcane Order of the past, which turns into the Green Knight and the Arcane Order of the present. It's really convoluted and it only goes over 10 episodes, so you spend half the episodes building up the Morgana-Arthur conflict, and then the Arcane Order ends up mostly getting sidelined with no real development. Whilst there were definitely some problems with Wizards, I don't really think any of them derail the show too seriously, and in the end we've been left with a really, really good show. And I find that especially impressive given how few episodes they had to work with. I feel like for the most part they hit it out of the park, and I'm really excited for the upcoming movie, and I hope that's not the end of the franchise. But now I want to hear your thoughts. What did you like, or what didn't you like? Let me know.